What would you say, what's the current landscape of dating like today? And what are the main challenges that people encounter in today's society with regard to dating?
Dating is a mess. I think it's always been a mess, but different brands of mess. Now, as things have changed when it comes to love and relationships, so have things with dating. So like now we look for partners to fulfill a variety of different things, like to be our best friend, to be our fuck buddy, to be our business partner, to be our like co-parent, to be our co-animal parent, to do a bunch of different things and to do it all really well. Whereas maybe 50 years ago, the idea of a red flag, like I said that to my mother and she was like, what? I don't know what that is. So the way that we look for partners has completely changed because our expectations of relationships have completely changed. And so in that space, people are looking for a fuck ton of characteristics and traits in potential partners. And because of that, people are very quick to discount. So most people are filtering out than filtering in, and the dating apps make things even harder. It's like shopping. So it's a bit of a mess. And I know that everybody is really, really struggling.
Yeah.
It's sad how difficult it can be.
Yeah, it is so difficult. In your new book, you talk about moving beyond the pursuit of the perfect partner.
Yeah.
Why do you think pursuing this idea of perfection is ultimately detrimental to our relationships and our, I guess, ultimately well-being?
Well, because it doesn't exist. It's science fiction. The idea of perfect anything doesn't exist. You know, I'm imperfect, you're imperfect. We're all so deeply flawed, just as all relationships are, just as the weather is. Like nothing is ever going to 100% fulfill us or make us feel satisfied in life, especially a partner. So the idea of a perfect partner and pursuing a perfect relationship is just going to keep us in this really hopeless, helpless, powerless place. I'm not the first one who talks about the idea of a good enough relationship or a good enough partner. So many people have, but that's really what we want to think about. We don't want to think about the partner that's going to check all of the boxes or the person that's going to validate us all the time. We want to think about someone we can tolerate when they don't fulfill our needs, someone we can tolerate when their imperfections do come up, someone whose limitations we can manage, because everyone is going to have limitations, everybody. And so we have to learn how to effectively manage them. But when we approach our relationships and people as objects to fulfill us, we're going to be let down. So the idea of a perfect partner or true love or the one or the perfect match or all of that is just a bunch of bullshit.
It's a bunch of bullshit.
And it comes from a really meaningful place, but it's just really unhelpful. And I think we all do that with our lives and pretty much anything in terms of pursuing something that's idealistic or perfection or aspirational when nothing is ever 100%, no matter what we're talking about, whether that's career, a shirt, a shoe, or a person.
Yeah, absolutely. What does good enough mean in the context of
Good enough means basically how we would approach ourselves. So if we would say, I'm good enough if I do X, Y, Z, that's the same kind of thing we want to look for in a partner. So that's somebody that satisfies us most of the time, where we can feel good most of the time. Where if they suck in some ways, we can say, okay, you know, you're really disappointing me right now, but that's okay. I still love these other parts of you and our relationship. So good enough is really individually defined in terms of what each person can tolerate, but I think we all need to learn how to tolerate a variety of different things in our relationships, which is really hard. But yeah, good enough is, I want to say it's good enough.
I have a friend who says that when looking to buy a house, you know, you can rely on finding 80% of what you want. It's very, very, very rare to find 100%, if it's even possible at all, to find 100% of what you want. I think it's like an appropriate analogy to make to, you know, finding that special someone.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been looking for a place in New York, and like literally everything there's always something's always off, and it's like that with people as well.
So you just have to be willing to make, I guess, compromises.
You have to be willing to accept a lot, to forgive a lot, to negotiate a lot, and tolerate a lot, which is something that's not part of the narrative about relationships, especially now. You know, we are looking for a relationship to give us everything, like I was saying, but we don't really acknowledge the reality that relationships can't, and that can really hurt us and make us feel scared and anxious and all of the things. So it has to be part of the relational conversation that I think is really lacking.
What do you think has shifted in terms of like the culture that makes us all these days more inclined to be looking for this idea of perfection?
And people are really anxious. And I think a lot of these rules about look for a partner who blah, 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 comes from a place of anxiety and trauma. That like we've just started to recognize trauma and the impacts it's had generationally, whether we're talking about wars, Holocaust, racism, all of the things, alcoholism, blah, 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 things that were really repressed and denied over the past however many decades. We're finally acknowledging them, which is pretty cool, to the point where trauma is like kind of trending. And in that space, we don't want to repeat the really bad things that hurt us. So we come up with a variety of different rules and approaches to our relationships. Now, I think that I would hypothesize are really based on how hurt we've been, how hurt our parents might have been, and how hurt has been inherited intergenerationally. And so culturally now we have these rules for relationships and ways to approach people that I believe are really based on more preventative measures that come from, we could say, maybe even a trauma response. So I do think it's historical and cultural. I don't think it's this new kind of scientific, fact-based thing that we've uncovered. I think collectively we've all been traumatized and hurt, and so have our parents. And since we're acknowledging our feelings now for the first time in like decades, this is, I think, some of the results, which isn't bad. But I do think that the pendulum has swung kind of completely in one direction, and it would be really nice if we could start trying to find some middle ground.
Absolutely. Do you think media and social media, like mass media and as well as social media, has played a role?
Yeah, I mean, it all does. And whether it's on Instagram or on TV, the way that we think about relationships, the way that we learn about relationships and sex and just life in general, it all contributes to the kind of collective conscious understanding of what we think we should be searching for.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up watching like Disney movies, and at the end of every Disney movie, you're promised either meeting your Prince Charming or your princess, or what have you. That happily ever after ending. And I don't know if prior generations were exposed to that kind of storytelling, with those kinds of promises. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, we're promised basically happiness.
Yeah.
Happily ever after.
Where does happiness come from?
I don't know. What is happiness?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, it's like it's an emotion, right? But it's also, it's got to be a thing that you do, right? It's a practice. Yeah.
I mean, whether we're talking about relational satisfaction or happiness or just overall life satisfaction, I mean, the weather is a really great analogy. I think food's a really great analogy too, that, we're not always going to make something that's going to be really fucking tasty, and the weather's not always going to be great, and we can't expect that either. That it's going to rain, that sometimes things won't taste that great. And happiness or sadness or any scary or exciting fun emotion is just an emotion that's temporary. This idea of how to find happiness, it's like, well, you feel it and then it goes away.
Yeah. What would you say as a therapist, what would you say are the biggest complaints that people have today with regard to dating?
Communication. No one communicates. I mean, there's a lot of complaints about dating. There's a lot of complaints. There's a difference between complaint and, I guess, context and meaning. So the verbal complaint is dating sucks, people suck, no one communicates, no one responds, no one's available, everyone's unavailable, everyone has a red flag, everyone is toxic, or they're a narcissist, or like whatever.
Everyone is an ick.
Everyone is an ick. But then there's a lot of meaning behind that. Like, in terms of people asking questions or statements like that, there's a lot of anxiety implied in a lot of those statements. Anxiety about being hurt. So the complaints like I had a client earlier today, and we were talking earlier today, it was early today. And we were talking about dating and the apps and being ghosted and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, every single complaint that you talked about, we could just say the subtext behind that is, I feel lonely and scared. They ghosted me. I feel lonely and scared. I feel lonely and hopeless. I feel, so there's a lot of meaning underlying underneath these complaints that I think often goes missed because we do a lot of reduction. in terms of how we approach people and our experiences. But so the complaints are, yeah, dating sucks, everything's hard, blah, blah, blah. But, the unconscious meaning there is, I'm really alone, I'm really scared, I don't want to be alone, I feel anxious, I don't want to be rejected. I mean, it can span the full gamut, but a lot of relational anxiety.
Loneliness is starting to come to light as being profoundly detrimental to our health.
Yeah.
Which is like this emotional sense. Obviously, it's a very unfortunate place to be if you're, feeling lonely, but we're starting to see now just how impactful it is from the standpoint of our biology, and it's not good. I mean, people have likened it to, alcoholism, to cigarette smoking. It's like that bad, which is, it's sad, especially considering, how many people feel alienated today. And I think social media, is social media playing a role? Because I mean, on the one hand, we feel today more connected with, I think, people than ever before. Maybe it's an illusion of connection. Because on the other hand, I mean, we're seeing rates of loneliness like skyrocket.
Yeah, I mean, people are extremely lonely. I mean, I also think that loneliness is a part of being alive. That no one's ever. This might sound really nihilistic, but like we live in our own mind. No one's going to truly understand the way that I see the color of that tree. I can communicate it, but no one's ever going to know the grief that I've experienced. I could communicate it, but there's always going to be some kind of disconnect. And I do think we are kind of all alone to some extent. However, some people are extremely isolated. And some people really, really struggle to connect and to feel that connection. So it's really tough. And again, the loneliness is, again, I think really deeply connected to trauma. And, the absence of what happens in trauma, which is usually connection and nurturing. And so when we start from a place of really not being nurtured, of being hurt or neglected or abandoned or just not nourished, loneliness can be a theme in our lives that can be particularly painful. And it can lead to a lot of suffering and really have a big impact on our bodies physiologically. So there is a symbiotic relationship between how our mind and our body, obviously, and loneliness is a big stressor for us.
So if trauma is one of the primary root causes, how do we address our trauma?
Well, you go to therapy. I mean, yes, you go to therapy, and we have to have some kind of understanding about trauma. You can't really work through trauma without talking about trauma. And that's not to say that, go to therapy, talk about trauma, and then bippity boppity boo, happily ever after, your problems are solved. Our trauma is ours. It's our story, but we have to make some kind of peace with it in terms of understanding it and welcoming it as it comes up and as it will come up throughout our lives. But the first part of dealing with trauma is really understanding it.
Understanding it, yeah. I mean, therapy plays it's played a big role for me, actually.
That's great.
Yeah, I've seen a therapist.
Yay, therapy.
Yay, therapy.
Yay.
On and off for the past 2 years. I was going consistently for about a year and a half, and now I kind of dose myself as needed.
Yeah, that's terrific.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Walk us through your background.
My background, which part?
Well, how did you decide to become a therapist? Yeah.
I became a therapist because I've been in therapy I started therapy when I was 10.
Wow.
I met my current therapist when I was 15, who I still see. Been seeing him every week since then. I'm 37, so it's 25 years I've been with him.
Same therapist.
I can't do math. Wait,
since
that
you
would
were
make
10.
me 40. Yeah. No,
Wow.
15. 22? Whatever, a while.
Wow.
So I'm a lifer. I have problems. My family is wildly nuts.
Where are you from?
I am from Newton, Massachusetts.
Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So your parents obviously put you in therapy at 10.
Yeah, they were pretty dysfunctional. My family was really crazy, but the one thing they did do was put me in therapy, which is interesting in itself. But that's really where my journey started. And then I noticed that the more I understood about my family dynamics, myself, what I was dealing with, what I was going through, the better I felt. And so it really just came out of this selfish place to want to feel better. Not selfish. That's not selfish at all. And then I studied it in school, and then I was like, I should just be a therapist. And then the motivating factor was really my life, my own personal experiences with mental health issues, with my family, with being helped and having this really impactful relationship with my therapist, Derek, who I write about, and then going to school.
Wow. That, I mean, must have had a profound impact on you at 10 for it to have influenced your life's journey, your career.
He's been like a surrogate father. I mean, I really would not be here today if I hadn't met him. He was, he really stepped in when my parents were not there, and it really, really changed my life. So that was really inspiring and motivating and meaningful for me. And so I wanted to do that.
How does one find a therapist? Like, I mean, there's
so hard.
It can be, right? I mean, you obviously got lucky.
Hard. Yeah, I mean, I got really lucky. Most people don't get to therapy or some kind of healer or helper or whatever words you want to use until they have a crisis, and usually they're mid-20s, mid-30s, sometimes later. And you have to think about you go through decades of your life without getting any help, without a voice that's affirming and reinforcing and positive and really just non-judgmental and helpful. So because it's so hard. We live in a culture that doesn't value that, not exactly handing out awards for you improved your life personally and emotionally. No. So it can be really hard to get to the place where you're like, I'm going to go to therapy, because there's still a lot of stigma or just absence of information about therapy in general.
What is the stigma?
The stigma, I think it's the same shit that, you don't need therapy unless you're totally nuts. And if you do go to therapy, that means something's wrong with you. It's the same shit. Or that you should be able to do it on your own, or blah, blah, blah. That many people are still dealing with that. And grew up in families and religions that are like, you're less of a person if you go to therapy or whatever. There's so many shitty values about that. But anyway, how do you find a therapist? You go online, you ask your doctor for referrals. For anyone listening, I would say I am a sex therapist, and I tend to favor people who have additional training in sex. So I would say to look up sex therapists, and there's different sex organizations, that sounds fun. Sex therapy organizations that have lists of therapists that have additional training in sex, and they're smaller and less intimidating. So then I would say reach out to 3 that you like and have a consult with them, and then see them.
What kinds of trauma do you treat as a sex therapist?
A variety of trauma, abuse, attachment trauma, a lot of different neglect, abandonment.
Wow.
All the things.
All the things.
And when I say I'm a sex therapist, it's not like I'm talking about dicks and clits all day. I mean, people are coming to me with just a variety of relational anxiety issues, general issues. Some people are specifically like, I'm here because I can't get hard or can't get off, or I have pain during sex. But again, usually that comes back to relational issues.
Interesting.
Attachment issues.
Wow. Are there any interesting case studies that you could share? People that have had trauma to the degree that it's affected their sex lives that you've helped them work through?
I don't think I know anybody who hasn't had trauma, I don't know anyone who hasn't had some kind of trauma. I think there's the big T trauma, which is real hardcore, sexual abuse and physical abuse and stuff like that. And then we could say little T trauma, which is more like a lack of nurturing or a neglect. And even some people would call something like passive abuse just a lack of nourishing and asking your kid question about their internal world. But I don't think anybody's not affected by some version of attachment trauma, and anybody's sexuality isn't affected by attachment trauma. Sex is a relational dynamic, even if you don't know the person or you're in a back alley, there is still a dynamic there. So because of that, all of the attachment issues that people have are going to come up, whether that's feeling confident enough to say, this is what I want, whether that's saying no, all of the things. I'm sure that everyone at some point has had sex and had their partner say, does this feel good? And they've said, yeah, that's fine. When they'd prefer, something completely different.
Wow.
And that's coming from an attachment issue in terms of maybe never being prioritized, never being asked about your emotions, all sorts of different things that people experience growing up.
Do you work with primarily men, women?
All of them. All of them.
Yeah.
All of the genders, all of the peoples, all of the ages.
Wow, interesting. I've heard you say on your Instagram, you've built this amazing following, a total social media star, and for good reason. The stuff you put out is awesome. That the healthiest relationships aren't necessarily the happiest relationships.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, similar to what we were saying before about happiness, is it's not like this constant state, and love or any relationship is not going to be a constant state of happiness. So people often think about healthy versus unhealthy, and healthy as being you have conversations and your needs are validated and everybody is so sweet and nice. But that's actually not the reality of any relationship. That we can have a healthy relationship and have periods where we're not happy with our partner, and it can still be healthy. I mean, that's not the fairy tale that I think we want to be in, or, hearing myself say that, I'm like, I don't want to be in that relationship. But unfortunately, that's the reality of relationships, is that, sometimes we're not going to be happy.
What would you say are the biggest mistakes that people make today in relationships?
In relationships, a lack of self-awareness. The mistakes in relationships come from the mistakes in relationships we make with ourselves first. And how that comes out with our partner. And that's really hard because, as I was saying, we don't live in a culture that's particularly encouraging of developing any kind of emotional, relational resilience or awareness. But most people aren't aware of why they're unhappy. And they'll blame their partner or they'll blame something else. And then they'll communicate that in a way that's critical, and then they'll get into conflict, and then it's just downhill from there. So people really, they want a lot from relationships, but they're not really willing to do the work that's necessary to make a relationship feel mostly satisfying.
Wow.
Which is a bummer. And I think that is connected to earlier trauma and cultural shit. Earlier trauma meaning, many of us grew up in places that weren't really invested in us. So it's hard for us to invest in ourselves in certain relational ways, and cultural in terms of we aren't told anywhere you should understand your trauma unless you're on Instagram or watching something on YouTube, or, you have to actively seek it out. It's not just hitting you on the head.
Yeah. And you have to work on yourself. You have to make yourself happy first before I think you can make anybody else happy.
Other than social media, I mean, I don't see that anywhere, on a TV show or in the movies or anywhere.
Yeah.
Culturally, we're not really encouraged to do that. Now we are more on social media, but it's still new.
Yeah. I mean, social media can be a depressing place. It's a double-edged sword, right? Yeah. I mean, it's like I go on social media and, within a span of 10 minutes, I've experienced like seemingly every single possible human emotion. You go to my explore page, it's like disgust, it's awe, it's like, oh my God, gross.
What's your awe part? Is it like a puppy or what is it?
Cats. Yeah.
Cats.
Yeah.
Cute.
Usually. Yeah. Cat guy.
Oh.
Yeah. My explore page it's very interesting actually, like to if you were to go to like a person's explore page, you probably learn a lot about that person, or maybe nothing at all. But if you go to my explore page, it's like cats. It's like really jacked, shirtless dudes, because like fitness, and maybe it's like my favorite singers. Lots of Daniel Craig. Bit of a man crush on DC. Yeah. And
well, that's what you have to go and click not interested.
Yeah.
That's what I do, because I'm like, I just don't want to be triggered. So my explore page is like interiors, and for a while it was watches, and then I'm like, okay, I can't buy any more watches. and then like it's like now it's like puppies and interiors. But like for a while it was like all these gay, perfect body, rich influencers, and I'm like, I can't, not interested, not in it. So now they're not there.
Interesting. Yeah, I also get a lot of like this is so weird, but medical oddities and like people with like crazy deformities, because I can't not click into them.
That's kind of fun though.
I mean,
it's entertaining. I get a lot of plastic surgery too, which I kind of like.
It's like I obviously want to see it because I tend to click into those videos, but ultimately I don't want to see them. It's just like
you gotta click the not interested.
You gotta click the not interested. Yeah, that's a very powerful tool actually, and it's likely an underutilized tool.
Yeah.
So you've got this book coming out.
I do.
Is this book like a synthesis of all your work thus far? Does it have a specific like point of view, perspective? Tell us about it.
Yeah. So the book is about me. It's about my last relationship. We were
like
together.
A 10-year-long relationship.
It was a 10-year relationship. We were together for a long time. It was my 20s. So it's about that experience, going through it, entering it, what led me to it, meaning parts of my past, etc. and encountering problems and then ultimately ending it, and then dating again for the first time in my 30s as an adult, and having sex as the first time after being monogamous for 10 years. It's also about all of my clients' relationships with similar experiences, because I noticed, as I was working as a therapist, I'm like having these issues in my own relationship, and then I'm noticing that my clients are going through the exact same shit. And I'm like, oh, these themes are all the same. So it's really tracking my relationship, my clients' relationships, and relationships in a general cultural sense to kind of create this, to pick out all of the themes that come up for most people as a way to talk about relationships in general.
Do you find at this point relationships easy? I mean, because I think people would assume that the therapist, the relationship expert, right, would have an easier time than the rest of us.
Do as I say, not as I do. Yeah. It's interesting because I often get objectified. People think I don't have problems, but I'm like, no, I have problems. I'm just aware of them all to an extent, as much as I can be. But no, I mean, I'm in a new relationship finally after being single for so fucking long. And I'm, having a lot of problems. But I mean, I'm doing things a lot differently in terms of like in my last relationship, and I talk about this in the book, I like totally was in a triggered place, didn't even know it. My partner would be like, what's wrong? I'd be like, nothing's wrong. And I would just complain to everybody else. But now, if my new partner says what's wrong, it only takes him asking me 10 times, and then I tell him. So I'm much more communicative in this relationship, and I'm doing things a lot differently. So I guess... So there's growth there.
There is growth, yeah.
But no, it's not problem free.
How do you address problems in a relationship?
I talk about them. Then I try to like actively work on them. The challenge is that, because I'm not dating a therapist, the way that I think about things is much different than the way a non-therapist thinks about things. Like I'm super analytical. I'm like, okay, well, these are the things we need to do. And this is what my partner's like, can we just like be present and not analyze and do all of these things? And I'm like, I guess we could try that. Which is interesting, and not because I think one approach is better or worse, just different.
That makes sense.
But yeah. How
do we cultivate self-awareness?
I mean, it's not that hard. I feel I was gonna it isn't.
Well, I'm like a really self-aware person.
That's awesome.
But I also know...
How did you cultivate that?
I don't know. I just think about myself a lot.
You selfish little bitch. No, I'm kidding. That's good. But you also sounds like you've been in therapy.
Yeah, I've been in therapy, but I think
you're very in touch with your body and what you put into it.
Very in touch with the body, what I put into it. Yeah, but I always am like, for as long as I can remember, I've been one to regularly take stock, like take inventory of how I'm feeling.
That's great.
My actions, like. I always try to maintain a limberness and like a curiosity about, I mean, not just about the world, but about myself. And I routinely will challenge like narratives that I hold about myself.
Good for you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm very self-critical and open to change, open to feedback.
Which is unique. Not many people do that.
Yeah. I know a lot of people who are like...
I hope you feel good about that.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's yeah, definitely. I mean, my self-criticism is always, at least as far as I can tell, it's constructive, I'm always like, for example, I always listen back to my own podcast to see where I can improve, with anything in life, with whether it's like fitness, my fitness routine, my hobbies, like I love to sing and I play guitar.
Cool.
And I'm always trying to get better.
What do you sing?
Like acoustic, like rock style.
That's fun.
Stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. But I'm self-taught. And so awesome. I've always sought outside feedback. I'm very receptive to that feedback in terms of like how I can be a better singer. Because it's something that I'm very passionate about.
Cool.
If I don't fully know the meaning of a word, like I want to know the meaning of the word. If I'm not pronouncing a word properly, like I'm very interested in like, so it's just always been a thing, I've always been like, it's like a growth mindset, I guess, that I've always had.
Yeah. Openness, flexibility, growth oriented. Those are great things.
But a lot of people aren't. Like I have very close friends that are their preferences are super narrow and rigid. Yeah. They haven't changed their style seemingly in years since I've known them. Like I have friends that I've known for like 10 years and they still wear the same pair of jeans, you know.
Those must be really comfortable after 10 years.
They must be really comfortable, right?
Maybe
But
that's
I'm like, I'm always changing. I'm looking at fashion. I'm like, you know, I'm keeping things dynamic. It's like a dynamic mindset versus a rigid mindset.
Yeah.
I think there's probably an association between a dynamism of mindset and, I would guess, self-awareness, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think people should be able to do whatever they want, but in terms of the rigidity and the lack of growth, I think it's connected to some kind of unconscious expression of resistance. Resistance to whatever change represents to their lives and their life story. You know, maybe not necessarily your friend with the same pants, but just people who are really afraid of growth or change. I mean, that's a fear, and it's a fear of confronting something, and that's resistance, and that's unconscious because they're not doing anything about it. But self-awareness is not that hard to find. In terms of, like, you could read a book, you could go to therapy, you could have a life coach, you could literally Google like a questionnaire, you could go on ChatGPT and you could ask ChatGPT, ask me questions to help me build self-awareness. I mean, there are so many resources, from people to virtual to AI, that we can use to become more aware. And the more aware we become, the better our relationships are, the better our life is, the more we can grow, change, blah, blah, blah. So I find it a real bummer when people are like anti-self-awareness or don't really appreciate the degree to which our awareness, the more we can expand our knowledge about who we are, can expand our lives. But it's a real necessity, and it's a real, you know, if you want to improve your relationships or just your life in general, like that's the place to start.
What if we're in a relationship with somebody who's not self-aware? Are there any ways to encourage them to take on that journey?
To tell them that that they might want to become self-aware, you know, to really push and to challenge them, to say, here are the reasons why. Give them a book. Tell them to go
give them your
listen
book.
to this podcast. Give them my book. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. What role does vulnerability play in cultivating healthy relationships?
If we want to have a good relationship, we have to be vulnerable.
What does that mean?
And vulnerability, I think people often associate with just self-disclosure, like when I was 10, my father, whatever, which can be part of vulnerability. But vulnerability to me is really opening ourselves up to feeling something with and in connection to someone else. So that could be feeling just excited, spontaneous laughter, spontaneous crying with someone, feeling sad and sharing that sadness. It's not necessary. It can be informational, but I think it's more emotional. It's really reaching out when in need. It's behavioral in that sense. And so relationships rely and thrive on connection and warmth and love. And you cannot connect or express warmth or love without being vulnerable. So it's a pretty big part of what it means to connect and to be in a relationship.
I love these that it's not necessarily informational.
Yeah.
It's emotional. Yeah. I mean, for me, vulnerability for a long time was purely informational. I felt that the more I could share about what I've done, what's happened to me, that was like peak vulnerability. But really, it's like when you share with somebody that you like them, or that you how a person makes you feel, when you incur risk with what you're sharing, you know, that the feelings that you're sharing might not necessarily be reciprocated or appreciated.
Yep.
Yeah, that's something that I think came about through like therapy and reading books and stuff.
And it can be informational, and it's really contextual then. Like if you're sharing information with feeling, like a lot of people are sharing information in this like kind of intellectual, here's the encyclopedia of my life kind of a way. But if you're sharing it in a way of, and in some kind of deeper emotional, meaningful way, and you're connecting in that space, then that can be vulnerable. But just a simple like biography is not necessarily a vulnerable thing.
Do you work with a mix of like, do you work with couples? Do you work with straight couples,
gay
couples,
all of the couples?
Wow. Are there challenges that are different, you know, in straight couples as compared to like gay lesbian couples and vice versa?
I want to say no. I mean, I think sex is much different. Gay couples or queer couples in general tend to start relationships talking about sex very explicitly. And that's not to say that they're having better sex, but it's to say that sexual communication is definitely higher with queer folks than straight folks. And I think there's just a lot of gender scripts and traditional norms and heteronormative values and rules that inform that a lot of straight people do not ask, what are you into on the first date?
Why is that? Why do you think
it's
why
historical?
Do you think
I mean, there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of shame on both genders. If we're talking about heteronormative straight people, for guys and girls, there's a lot of fear about what that means, the rules. Whereas with queer people, we've not really had many rules for sex. And so the focus can easily turn or shift towards sex, which allows for more conversation. But in terms of the relational dynamics, it's all the same shit. I mean, there are maybe some differences in terms of like household stuff, in terms of how a lot of straight couples are set up. Still traditionally where, guy works, girl stays at home, or there's a financial discrepancy. And so a power dynamic that's a lot different. But in terms of the challenges and conflicts, a lot of them are really similar that I think historically we've made way too many distinctions and differentiations between queer and straight couples. And I don't think at least in my experience, there are these like small differences here and there, but overall in terms of how love is negotiated and intimacy and attachment is done, they're very similar.
Yeah, it's just humans relating to humans.
Yeah.
Wow. Super interesting. Yeah, I mean,
I'll just say though, that a lot of books that are written about relationships and sex in general, they're primarily written for straight people. So then they have to make a distinction. And so then that communicates that there is a distinction, but it's nominal. And we could say if it's going to be 0.3%, then that's just standard errors. So it's like, I don't know. I don't see a lot of differences beyond what I said.
No.
Anyway.
I love that. It's a big, I guess, misconception that exists.
Yeah.
I watched the movie Bros. That was my most recent.
It's funny.
Yeah, I mean, and I have like gay couples that are like very close friends, but yeah, I see that there's like this, at least in the pop culture representation. I don't know how accurate that movie was, although I've heard it was accurate, like an accurate portrayal of a modern gay couple, or gay relationships. That there's like this more of a willingness to like be open, I guess.
In terms of non-monogamy?
Yeah.
Oh.
Is that true or like accurate or?
Yeah. I mean, 5 years ago, I don't think I knew any straight couples that were open and pursuing non-monogamy or polyamory. And there was a lot of shame. But now it is. Versus I don't think it works, though. Does 5 years ago, they're being open, non-monogamous, polyamorous with a lot of queer couples was just a thing.
The straight couples that I know that have dabbled in that, like the relationships usually don't, for as much energy and attention they put on protecting the sovereignty of the primary relationship, it doesn't seem to work long term, is what I'll say. But respect anybody who's making it work.
It can work.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the times when we're looking at relationships, whether they're monogamous or non-monogamous, especially with the non-traditional relationships, we could say that they don't work because of that. But there's usually other things that are going on in the relationships that, aren't working. Also, a lot of relationships don't work.
Yeah, I mean, you can't use openness as a Band-Aid for a relationship that fundamentally doesn't work.
Yeah, but people end relationships for all sorts of reasons, whether they're monogamous or non-monogamous. But it's less about the structure of the relationship and the people in it, and if they're willing to do the work that's required. Do
you see the trend increasing in popularity?
Yeah.
And acceptance, ultimately?
Yeah, I think so.
Wow. Love it. Another thing that I've heard you say that I thought was really profound is that your partner is not your own personal need fulfilling machine, which I thought was really
too bad.
It's too bad, right?
Yeah. I thought that's what they were there for.
Right?
What the fuck? Yeah. It's a real problem.
No, but I mean, in actuality, it's like it's a very unrealistic expectation to expect your partner to fulfill every single one of your needs.
Yeah. That I think most people would say, I don't expect that. And then when their partner doesn't, they're like really fucking pissed and disappointed and spiraling about how awful their partner is for not fulfilling whatever need they wanted fulfilled. It's hard. It's really hard. But yeah, no, I am saying this and struggling with it at the same time, you know, in terms of not getting needs that I'd like fulfilled by my current partner, and knowing that that's not possible, but still feeling disappointed about it. So, that is the reality, and that doesn't mean that people aren't still going to feel disappointed by it. But no, our partner cannot, just like we can't. Like, can you imagine having to fulfill someone's all of their needs? Like, that's a full-time job. You wouldn't be able to function. We have to be able to fulfill our own needs to some extent, and have it complemented by our partner also doing that with us.
On the other hand, though, you talk about challenging the stigma against neediness.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, people often assume that having needs is bad, catching feelings, being clingy, all of this shit. And, you know, that's just not the case. We all have needs. Sometimes they're just different. And oftentimes the people talking about someone being needy is a partner who is not able to fulfill their partner's needs. And therefore then they become the needy one. But I think people just have to own their needs. It doesn't mean though that because they have a specific set of needs that their partner has to fulfill them. I told you I need this and therefore you must fulfill that. It's not really how it works. We are all free to have a set of needs and to ask our partners to fulfill them and to feel disappointed when they don't. But to expect that they will be fulfilled or that we shouldn't have needs is, you know, both ridiculous. We're going to have needs. And for some of us, there might be a lot of them, and for others, not so much. I like to think of needs as styles, and not attachment styles, but just styles of being. You know, I want a lot of affection and affirmation and together time. You know, my partner doesn't necessarily need that. We're just different. They're different styles of being. So that's not to say, am I too needy? Is he not needy enough? It's just to say we're different.
That makes sense. Are you a fan of attachment theory?
Yeah. I think it's kind of it's trending so much that it's become like a cultural diagnosis at this point. And people are like, I am anxiously attached. I am avoidant. And then certain attachment styles get a bad rap, like avoidant attachment. But I like to think of attachment more in terms of attachment trauma and less about different styles in adult relationships.
Especially also because they're fairly fluid, if I understand them correctly. Like they can change, and you can have multiple attachment styles depending on context.
Yeah. In the book I write about attachment, but I write about it in terms of a reenactment or a recreation of attachment dynamics, but I don't write about it in terms of someone having an identity as an anxious attachment or a pairing of an anxious attachment and an avoidant attachment, which has become really popularized and really discussed a lot. I frame it in terms of a reenactment. So a reenactment of earlier dynamics of trauma, attachment traumas, a variety of different traumas. For me in my practice work, that's been most helpful for, I guess, me and I think my clients as well in terms of developing self-awareness. Whereas I do think that when people are talking about, you know, anxious attachment, you know, these labels, that it is limiting, you know.
Yeah, because once you start to identify with a label, it's like a box.
Yeah.
You know?
And then your partner is fundamentally the opposite. And then the goal becomes security, which who the fuck knows what that means. And then you miss why you have the anxious attachment. You disconnect from the real narrative, which is my parent was inconsistent in how they loved me. 1 minute they were there, 1 minute they weren't. My partner is sometimes there and sometimes not. And when they're not, it triggers this earlier stuff. So that is, I think, what's most important. Not I have the characteristics and I meet criteria and so I must be, which I think has become the focus.
How do you deal with conflict in a relationship? Like when conflict arises, any tools, tactics?
You push it under the rug and you avoid all hard conversation.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that what everybody does? Conflict's not bad. I mean, if you're in a relationship and you don't have conflict, you're in trouble. Nor is fighting. I know people are probably surprised to hear that even if you're screaming and yelling, I mean, obviously, you know, I'm not a fan of screaming and yelling, but many couples scream and yell, and they're still somehow able to repair and report feeling satisfied. So fighting's not necessarily bad, so long as you're not doing the fuck yous, you're a piece of shit, the name calling, the abusive stuff, like all of the things that we should all understand as a big no. Blame is a bad thing as well. Don't do that. But conflict's pretty good. I mean, that's how we get our needs fulfilled, or that's how we negotiate not getting our needs fulfilled and something else. And it's how we work through challenges as they arise. So conflict's really important and a really great part of a relationship. It's just that so many people lack awareness that they don't do conflict in a way that's productive or helpful. And so they never get to a place where they're actually working through it. They're just having it. So conflict's not bad. It's scary, requires communication, requires a lot of emotional karate work. It's really hard, but it's an important piece of a relationship, and it's something to practice and get comfortable with. I really do think it's a skill.
Wow.
Again, something that culturally we just learn more about. Math and geography, which geography is important. I'll take that back. But math and driver's ed than we do how to have a conflict or develop self-awareness. So
that's true.
We're kind of all set up to fail in one way or another.
So it's interesting. It's interesting. It's not just like a stress test, but it actually helps to strengthen the system ultimately.
Totally.
And then you get to have makeup sex.
Yes.
Which probably serves an adaptive purpose as well.
I mean, it's reconnective. It's called a repair. And that's also a really important part of conflict. Is people are like, well, how do I solve the conflict? I'm like, well, you focus more on the repair is really the solution to the conflict, right? Because we get into conflicts because ultimately the goal is I want to connect with you and I'm feeling like something's off, like you're doing this thing or I'm doing this thing or whatever. We have conflict in service of wanting to connect. So, the main goal is to connect, even if you can't solve the conflict. So whether it's makeup sex or a hug or making inside jokes and laughing or watching the British baking show and cuddling, the repair is really important. So even if you're not solving conflict, it's important to really focus on the repair.
What are are there any green flags that you think are worth looking out for, particularly in the early stage of a relationship?
Well, I mean, early stages of a relationship, so I just talked about how hard relationships are, but the early stages really shouldn't be that hard in terms of shouldn't be that much conflict. Spending time together shouldn't be this constant negotiation, that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that it won't be harder, stir up anxiety or stuff like that or earlier trauma, but for the most part, it should be kind of low conflict. Wait, what was the question? Early stages?
Green flags.
Green flags.
How to know that you're, I mean, even, early on in a relationship, signs that you are with somebody who's willing to do the work, who's, who is self-aware.
And
that it's
so there are signs. So self-awareness. So if you do have a conversation, it's not going to turn into escalated conflict. Green flag, definitely lots of good sex, fun times together. I mean, the positive aspects of relationships, not to be so simplistic, but spending time together and laughing, going on dates and having a good time, all of this stuff. The together time that feels really nice and connective, even if there's a disconnect that you can talk about it and it's not going to turn into this escalated conflict where you're going to hate the person for 3 weeks.
What about assessing shared values? Because I know that value overlap is a significant predictor of long-term relationship success.
Yeah. I mean, I also wonder if people are dating somebody and they have no shared values, how are they going, what is keeping them interested?
Yeah.
But shared values in terms of social values and stuff like that.
Yeah, I suppose, or maybe it's valuing health, wellness.
Yeah,
animals.
well, that's what I mean. In terms of people, if they're dating someone with completely contrasting values, I wonder what drew you in. If someone really values health and wellness and they're with somebody who doesn't give a shit.
It's all about the sex,
It could be all about the sex. But then they have to understand that they've chosen a partner who doesn't value the same things that they do and that's going to probably be a problem that they're going to have to accept or not. But that's something I think, especially in the early dating phases, that people are, collecting data about, is this something that you value? In terms of wellness, I say I'm in therapy. Is that something that you're open to, that you do, or that you think is good? Or are you opposed to it because you think you're a man and men don't need therapy? What's happening? And we want to try to understand that before we're getting into a relationship with somebody if they're completely different from us in that sense.
I mean, you talked earlier about the stigma related to therapy. I think it's a major green flag if you're seeing somebody,
which is interesting because like before it was a major red flag. And this is just how, you know, when culture changes, relationship changes, which is a big thing that I talk about in the book, is the context of where our relationships are. But yeah, I mean, if someone says I'm going to therapy, that's a total green flag. I think that's hot. And if someone said they've never been to therapy, I like in the past when I was dating, I wouldn't go out with them again.
Really?
It was a screener. I was on the apps and that's one of the questions I would ask. And if they said no, never had the reason, especially as a gay man, I'm like, you've never had the reason to go to therapy, which is just internalized homophobia and stigma and all this stuff. And I understand that. But for me,
you had internalized homophobia?
Everyone has internalized homophobia. But I'm just saying the reason when they're saying I never had a reason to go, you know, it's a lot of denial, which I understand. But for me, I don't want to date somebody who is that much in denial. Because I'm like, if you haven't been to therapy and I'm a therapist, like, it isn't going to work.
I feel like most people haven't, you know,
a lot of people have never been to therapy. Which is, you know, again, I keep saying this because I don't want to sound judgmental, because I totally get it. But, you know, when it comes to my own heart, that's just not something that was appealing for me.
Yeah. Very interesting. We work with a company called BetterHelp. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah.
They just make it, it's like they've democratized the process. Yeah. Very interesting. So anything surprise you over the course of writing the book? Or surprising findings that you've shared in the book that stand out as being, you know, particularly concepts that are perhaps like more under the radar that you think need to gain greater awareness?
I mean, well, there was the aspects that are about me that surprised me about writing about myself for so long. That was more just annoying and
what'd you learn about yourself?
And then there are the aspects like that I think are kind of interesting, just cultural things. Some of that stuff, like breakups, the amount of celebration that happens for love or for relationships when people get together is outrageous. Like, we have holidays for it, weddings and anniversary parties and Valentine's Day. But when it comes to breakups, it's like complete silence. We don't celebrate it, yet breakups and new relationships are kind of two sides of a different, what is that phrase? Two coins of a side of blah, blah, blah.
Something like that.
They're on the same coin.
Yeah.
They're just different sides of the same coin. There we go. But just as important, when you get into a relationship, you grow, you become a different person. When you get out of a relationship, you grow, you become a different person. But we do not give any sort of credit to people ending relationships. People don't know how to end relationships. People feel a tremendous amount of shame ending relationships, both in terms of not having been able to do it soon enough, whatever that means, to it's a failure, to all of that shit. That there's just so much horrible cultural stuff wrapped up into relational endings when they're a beginning of a new life. It's pain and it's sadness and it's fucking awful, but like, it's interesting to me what we value, you know, that we don't value that because it's so painful and there's a lot of suffering.
Well, similar, we have a similar relationship, at least here in the West, with death. You know, we just don't talk about it.
Same thing.
Yeah.
But incredibly important. But when I wrote that part of that chapter, I was like, this is so right. This is so true. Those were the times when I enjoyed the writing process.
How did you heal in the aftermath of your 10-year-long relationship?
I'm still healing. I don't fucking know. It was really hard. You know, we grew up together. I'm disconnected from my family, so he was my family. So it took me a while to end it. It took me a really fucking long time to end the relationship. Post-relationship, we were still talking and sexting and doing things that were not helpful for years after. I mean, it was really hard to separate. I still sometimes have dreams about him. You know, it's hard. You know, when you love somebody for 10 years, it's not like that just disappears. So that was incredibly hard, which is, you know, why I was writing about the ending of relational endings, because I noticed that, like, I was going through all of this stuff, and then on Instagram, I would do my Q&As and people would be like, it's been 3 months, I'm not over it. It's been 2 years and I still dream about my ex. And I'm like, I had a dream last night. This is normal. This is awful and terrible. And this is what you're going to go through. So it's a big deal that people just don't, or I think we collectively just don't really acknowledge how hard it is. Similarly with getting into a relationship, I don't think people acknowledge how hard that is either.
Yeah.
Which I find really fascinating and interesting because it's such a universal experience.
How do you compartmentalize that? Like a past relationship with that degree of gravity in your life, is particularly when you're now in a new one, like a healthy new relationship.
I don't really even, I mean, compartmentalize is this word that I don't know. I mean, we all use it. I don't know really. I mean, does it mean deny it, forget about it, not think about it? I don't even know. I mean, I use my experience in my past relationship to better craft or co-author or whatever the fuck my new relationship. So things that I liked, things that I didn't like, I'm very much aware of what those things are and what I want to get from my current relationship in that sense.
Yeah.
But I wish there was a way I could just kind of tuck it away and just be like, okay, that's done.
Yeah. What is it, like the 7 steps, or 5? I don't even know.
7 principles to make a marriage work, the Gottman book?
Well, no, I was thinking about grief, like grieving, like grieving over the death of a relationship.
Yeah.
And just how long that can take.
6 stages? I don't know. I had a class on
like
this.
5, 6, 7, somewhere in that
somewhere
range.
Like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but grief's not linear. It's all up, down, and all around. It'll come back, it'll go away, it changes, it grows, depends on your context. Like, I was still having a lot of dreams about my ex or thinking about him more often, and then when I met my new partner, that kind of stopped. Thank fucking God. Mind you, this was 5 years ago that my relationship ended. 6.
5 years ago. And you've been in your new relationship now for...
Not that long. 6 months.
Well, mazel tov.
Thanks.
Like,
yeah.
That's exciting. And you're based in New York.
I'm based in New York.
And have lived in LA.
Yeah, I did the bi-coastal thing for a couple of years. And I loved LA, but New York felt like home. So I went back to that dump. It's so gross.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, I love New York City. I'll always love it, having grown up there. But no, I prefer LA, especially at this point in my life. It's just like New York is too dense. It's too loud. It's too crazy.
Seriously.
But I mean, it's a phenomenal city. Just the density of it,
I know.
There's so much life in that city that it can be overwhelming, but it could also be beautiful at times.
Yeah, I draw a lot of stimulation from that life, but it is a true jump. LA is like ridiculously nice. It's crazy to me. Like the weather, the sun. When I landed last night, I was like, the sky in LA is just fucking gorgeous. Like it's crazy. Even at night, the blue. It's wild. Everything is very nice in LA.
Both of these cities, though, New York and LA, they both require, just living here requires its own form of therapy in and of itself, because I feel like there's so much, there's so many different types, flavors of like social pressure, depending on what tribe you find yourself in. But it's like, they can be stressful cities. You definitely have to like really prioritize self-care in these cities, probably other cities as well. But, my experience, New York and LA, you definitely need to prioritize self-care. Otherwise the city can really find a way to get under your skin. I used to feel that when there was a point in my life when, my career, I was at like a career low, and my mom had just gotten sick, and I was like spending a lot of time at that point in LA prior to having moved back to New York to be closer to my mom. And the city has a way of amplifying like your anxieties and your loneliness in a way that I don't think New York, you don't really ever feel alone in New York. At least that's my, experience.
Oh, you're saying LA has a way of...
Yeah.
Yeah.
In New York, there's like this ambient energy that I think is, it's kind of nice to be around.
Yeah, that's ultimately what brought me back there.
Yeah.
In LA, I was just like, it's quiet, and it felt too quiet, and I was just like, it's lonely. I just want to walk to fucking CVS and hear loud noises. Where's the trash?
I know. Yeah, it can be an alienating city. So what do people stand to gain from your book? Like, who do you write it for?
I got asked this question the other day, and I was like, everybody? I really need to figure a very specific niche, whatever. No, I mean, I think, if you're stuck, if you're struggling, if you're trying to figure out who you are and what you want, I think there's a lot to get from the book in terms of how to connect better with yourself and then therefore connect better with other people. But also, it's not a typical self-help relationship book. Like the last chapter of my book is called Give Up Hope, because I really try to blend a lot of philosophy into the book in terms of, as we started talking about today, happiness and all of these expectations about perfection and how life should be and hoping that we're going to be happy and healthy and blah, 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 which, sure. But the more we hope, the more we cling to some of these ideals, the more anxious we become. So towards the end of the book, it's really more philosophical in terms of accepting who we are today, accepting our partners, who they are, a lot of acceptance, a lot of forgiveness, a lot of Buddhism and existentialism. So it isn't just this psychological self-help book about, the 10 steps to whatever. There's a lot of meaning to be had and to read. And it's a story-based book. So it's a story about me, a story about my clients, and throughout the book, I encourage the reader to write a story about themselves as well. So to develop self-awareness. So if someone's looking to develop self-awareness and to use that awareness to have a better life, then that's for them. And that's everyone who needs that.
What is the archetype of somebody who's like completely not self-aware? Like what are some salient characteristics of that person?
My mind goes to specific people in my family. What are characteristics? I think you talked a couple of rigid, a lack of growth-oriented mindset, inflexible, unchanging, unwavering, unwilling to listen to other perspectives, quick to shoot them down, overly opinionated, not open. I could go on and on and on.
Yeah.
Again, describing people.
I know there's a handful of people in my life that like you've just described to a T, and they struggle in relationships.
Yeah, I can't.
It's no wonder.
It's really hard to be around that.
Yeah. It's not, I'm trying to think, because it's like, there are some good characteristics. There are some, I think there are some like, there is something nice about somebody who's like, I don't know, like not changing. Like there's something reliable about that, about having that person in your life who's just like consistently there and like is a certain way, but it's probably not serving them.
No.
And that person, lo and behold, I'm thinking of one person in particular, an amazing friend, but like struggles in relationships and, just like, just completely not self-aware, and you can see where in their life they would probably see improvement were they only to be more self-aware. And so it's super important.
100%.
Stuff. Yeah. So what's your day-to-day like? You're just like putting out the content on social media. You do like all kinds of great work. Do you see clients regularly? Do you do it via like telemedicine or whatever? Is it always in person?
Day to day is usually like today I have like 3-4 clients, another call later, writing content.
Does it ever
trying to figure out what else I should be doing?
Does it, as a therapist, does it ever get tiring?
Being a therapist?
Yeah.
It's not. People often assume that it's like, oh, that must be so hard for you to hear all of that, and like it's not. It's actually really meaningful, to have really intimate relationships with a lot of people. The hard part is just like, as I'm sure you can understand, like maintaining focus in a deeper or meaningful conversation where you fundamentally have to be present is really draining. Like you're a host for the show. So like if you did 4 of these, it would be really exhausting.
Right.
So it's like, it's that kind of energy, the energy that requires such presence and like meaning and connection, that's hard. But beyond that, it's the connection that's really nice. Even if my clients are crying, like, they're like, that must be so hard. I'm like, it's not like great. Like, I don't want my clients to cry, but it's just an aspect of our relationship that's dynamic and deeper. But it is the like sustained focus and like, as again, you have to ask questions and be interested and curious. Even if you're going through a bunch of shit, like you have to just be present. So that's hard.
Yeah, I get it. Well, thanks for coming out. Where can people pick up your book, and where can they find you on social media?
Find me on social media at Your Diagnonsense. And you can buy my book anywhere, everywhere. Pre-order it, or I don't know when this is going out, but
probably around the same time that the book is released.
Okay. Yeah, you can get it anywhere.
Yeah, get it anywhere. And if it's not yet out, pre-order it. Pre-orders are from what I hear, pre-orders are important.
Yeah.
And also, we love supporting our local bookstores, right? Want to support the mom and pop shops. The last question that gets asked to everybody on the show: what does living a genius life mean to you?
Living a genius life, self-awareness, growth.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. Self-awareness.
Yeah.
It all comes back to that.
Yeah. I've said it so many times that now I'm like, oh, what is it?
Well, it's important.
Like just breathing.
It's important.
Just be present. Just be self-aware.
And it's underappreciated.
But yeah, it's important. It is underappreciated.
Yeah. And not everybody has it. So
yeah, easy access.
You're doing a public good. Exactly.
Yeah. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.